Namaste and welcome to Urban Chaturati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by Rajiv Mantri, author, investor, and public policy commentator. Thanks, Rajiv, for coming to my show.
Thank you, Abhinav, for inviting me.
So, Rajiv, when we're talking about India's future economic growth, one thing stands very prominently is the growth of the fintech in India. In fact, the fintechs now lead the unicorn race in India. Most of the unicorns in the last few years are basically these technological based financial apps or companies. What is this entire phenomenon all about?
So, to put it very simply, Abhinav, financial services are essentially tasked with converting savings into financial savings into investment. Now, fintech companies per se are basically adopting digital channels to kind of assist that conversion, right? So, whether it is credit availability, whether it is access to equity capital markets, and other kinds of financial tools and availability tools and services that businesses require, consumers require. So the new age companies are providing all of that. And the difference, I think the key difference here is the sheer distribution power that digital enables. So in the old sort of, let's say, pre-digital world, reaching out to people, getting that distribution for millions was very challenging. So you had to have physical branches, you had to have kind of physical touch points. But now what is happening is all of this is possible to do through a smartphone. And as we all know, India has seen a dramatic escalation in telecom penetration, 4G penetration in the last 3-4 years, thanks to Reliance Jio. And also cost of smartphones has come down. So now what we are seeing is even the lower income groups and middle income groups are able to buy and afford some of the most cutting edge hardware. So the combination of hardware and network, which is the telecom network, is making it possible to build new kinds of software and services for this set of businesses and consumers, which were till now really untapped. And combine that in the private sector with what government has done in the public sector through different policies. So the rise of UPI and those payment rails, the availability of electronic transactions and pushing Jan Dhan accounts, Aadhaar as a mode for electronic KYC, know your customer. So all of that has made it possible to open customer accounts, to service sort of heretofore customers which were very expensive to service. So the collapse of that cost of servicing, along with obviously meeting the huge need that is there in India on the credit side, the huge need for listed companies to access capital for savers to deploy their savings into something better than an FD, which nowadays is hardly yielding anything. So all of that is being enabled by the fintech companies. And while a lot of people think that so much has happened and the valuations are looking expensive to some people and so on, we should remember that this is just day zero. This is just the beginning, and India has many years and very vast sort of headroom to grow from here.
So basically, this is what Sahara did 20 years back or 25 years back when they expanded their saving schemes to the villages and the countryside, and they were able to mobilize, and the Sahara became so big. But the question arises, is the same thing happening again, that these people are jumping into the financial market, the lower income group, the people, just because they have a phone and a mobile and an internet network?
No, so there's a difference.
That also lead to same kind of fraud in the future or losses for the masses?
No. So actually, with Sahara specifically, if you're talking about Sahara, I'm not deeply familiar with the case there, but I believe it was some kind of a chit fund which Sahara was running, right? So a chit fund is a particular kind of collective investment scheme. It is a particular kind of pooling vehicle. And Sahara obviously was offering that to certain lower income groups. And essentially it was a chit fund scheme, but I think it devolved into a Ponzi scheme.
No, but
and
the
which
point
was a
here is
scam there. But what is happening now?
yeah, is the
Yeah,
question of
what is
financial
happening
literacy.
now? Yeah, literacy is definitely a challenge. Literacy is definitely a challenge. But then, in the last 5 odd years, there has been a significant campaign. What's called mutual fund sahi hai. What's called systematic investment plans.
Hmm.
Those kind of products have been offered. These are low cost, relatively low cost kind of fixed investments every month, where people can invest 1,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees or whatever into a index fund or something like that, and that is a good avenue to park savings. So I think it is very qualitatively different from something like a chit fund. In fact, when any small saver is buying into these instruments, they are basically become indirectly a shareholder of the blue chip companies in India.
Hmm. Yeah, so this is true. This technology has completely transformed how we manage our finances. I remember when I was opening my NPS account, so my father called me up and he told me you have to go to the bank, do this, do that, all kind of funda. And I listened to everything and I
Yeah.
opened my laptop within 15 minutes using my Aadhaar, it was done. So it is transforming, it is changing everything. But and when we think about money today, we don't think about banks anymore. We think about fintech companies. We think about Paytm. We think about our credit cards. Are banks becoming redundant?
So they definitely need to evolve. I would say the era where there was a time when it still is very priced, but getting a banking license was almost like a license to print money, right? So it's a monopoly granted by a kind of a monopoly right, exclusive right granted by a government to do certain types of business which other people don't have through the license, and it was a very prized license. It is a very prized license, but increasingly banks have to change. Banks have to evolve, and even the RBI has created new types of banks. There are the small finance banks. There are the payment banks. There are different types of institutions now performing even very verticalized type of functions. So banks certainly need to evolve and keep up with the technology challenge, so to say, which they are now seeing from some of the new age companies.
But let's say, as an investor, as someone who deals with the finances every day, what kind of evolution would you like to see in the banks?
So, the whole concept of branch based banking, and even that actually was regulated, right? So, for a bank to open new branches, RBI would sort of approve that. So, the central bank would decide how many more branches can be opened, who can open how many branches, and so on. So, that kind of very tight regulation was there, which is why we also saw a very large informal financial system come up in India. The informal money lenders, local level kind of borrowing happening in cash, whether it's in cities or in towns or in even villages. This was pretty common that people are borrowing and lending in cash, completely in cash. So there were individuals whom you could call banks, but they're not really licensed or regulated. So the changes that banks need to make really, that they had a certain stodgy attitude. There was a certain sort of stodginess about where else will you go if you don't work with the bank, right? But then there are different pieces that are now being encroached upon by some of these incumbents. So the NBFCs have come in a big way, which is why if you look at the share of PSU banks, for example, the share of lending that PSU banks have been doing, that's been coming down significantly over the last decade. So NBFCs have picked up some of the slack there. Ultimately, the credit needs to persist, right? So just because the government says that only so much can be done in the formal system, doesn't mean the society will quietly accept that. People still have credit needs. They will go somewhere. So there is a case to kind of expand access like that, which somewhere regulators have been slow to do, unfortunately. And now we are seeing that technology is kind of challenging regulators world over, not just in India, but world over.
But isn't that a problem that you're moving from an over-regulated banking finance sector to technology-enabled sector, which is difficult to regulate if not unregulated?
Yeah, so it is a challenge for sure, because it requires certain kinds of internal restructuring, reorganization within the regulator, right? So this is a kind of a new beast that they're dealing with. So certainly they have to change processes, change methods, and so on, to sort of keep up with what is going on. Often the trigger for this kind of keeping up is really a crisis. There's a crisis that happens, and then regulators really change their ways, and then sort of they pull it back, and sometimes they pull back too much.
But talking about the new beast, Rajiv, there's a new beast in the town. It is called cryptocurrency. And
Yeah.
Indian regulators, Indian policymakers don't know what to do about it. So, first of all, what is this cryptocurrency? Because many people don't understand what is this entire thing all about, cryptocurrency.
See, there's a lot of confusion about it because this is an area which has its own language, own jargon, and oftentimes people sort of use that jargon loosely, even not knowing exactly what that entails, right? So, like for example, there is, I mean, with cryptocurrencies, when people say Bitcoin, do they mean the Bitcoin network with the capital B, or do they mean the traded Bitcoin with the small b? Because both are called Bitcoin. So oftentimes people don't even know what they are talking about when they just throw around these words. And then I think there is an excessive focus on the price of these crypto assets, because the price is the easiest thing to talk about, right? Anyone can look up and say, oh, this went up 5%, this went down 25%, and again the volatility is high or low. But that's not necessarily the most interesting thing about cryptocurrencies. There are many more things that crypto assets can do, which frankly people are not intelligently discussing. I mean, if you want, I can give you a very basic like crash course about this in a few sentences. I mean, I'm not an expert on it by any means, but I'm doing my own study and own reading, and I've sort of learned a few things over the last several years and months. So
Yeah.
I
Please
mean,
tell us about cryptocurrency and share some knowledge. I know knowledge is not free, and you are an investor. Perhaps
no. I mean,
over to the audience.
let me just sort of talk briefly about this. So let's talk about blockchains first. So a blockchain is essentially a database of records that are linked together by cryptography. Cryptography is a kind of a specialized branch of mathematics, right? So what is also used for in military for like basically coding and code breaking. So a blockchain is governed by the rules written into the protocol for communication between the pieces of the chain, which are the records. And blockchains can be both permissioned and private, or public and also permissionless. So you have permissioned blockchains and permissionless blockchains. So the permissioned blockchains, they have certain access control built into them, and permissioned blockchains are usually the private blockchains where anyone can sort of create a database of records linked by such cryptography, right? So the private blockchains are also what are called distributed ledgers. So often there is a section that is in favor of distributed ledger technology, what's called DLT, and they're in favor of permissioned blockchains, but they're not in favor of the public blockchains, which is Bitcoin is a kind of a public blockchain. So the computational process by which you add a block to the chain of records is called mining, and that is achieved by kind of a cryptographic problem solving, basically, what is called proof of work. So cryptocurrencies or crypto assets can be thought of as digital assets that use the blockchains to record transactions, and they enable value transfer. And any person or entity can create their own blockchain, which is what certain central banks are trying to do now. So central banks are issuing what are called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, and these are the permissioned ones. So the distinction between public and private. So a CBDC or central bank digital currency would be a permissioned blockchain having access control. And what the most well-known crypto asset or cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, is a permissionless public blockchain. Another example of that kind of a public blockchain is Ethereum. So Ethereum is the platform on which many smart contracts and decentralized applications, what are called DApps, decentralized applications are being built on the Ethereum network, and the native the asset in the Ethereum network is called Ether or ETH.
But when you I think you tweeted about it that this is just the beginning of the cryptocurrency. Many people are saying that these cryptocurrencies are overvalued. There's a mad rush. This is just like a classic bubble. But you were saying this is just the beginning, and this is going to accelerate in the future, and it's not going down, at least in the foreseeable future. Why would you say that?
So the reason, see, a lot of people are focused on the price, like I was saying earlier, right? They see that they think that this was worth, or this was traded at a price of, let's say $5,000 a year ago, and now it's up 10x. So they are like, this is speculation, this is this and this is that. I mean, but like I said, the price is the least interesting thing about blockchain, and particularly permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So what can these things do? Well, people are still experimenting. People are still figuring out what are the possible applications in different sectors. I like to draw an analogy with the internet, right? So if you had the internet in 1995, you would think, what can this do? You would say, you could say the same thing about the dot-com companies, which were sort of that period of 1997 to 1999. There were all kinds of crazy valuations and so on and so forth. Just because there was a kind of even if we accept that what we are seeing right now is a certain type of a financial sort of mania or a market mania, it doesn't mean the fundamental behind that, the fundamental technology behind that is also worthless, right? There was a dot-com crash, but then we have seen what the internet enables in the last 20 years.
True, completely transformed the world. Yeah.
So in the same way, I think blockchain and the global permissionless public blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they will also create something. Now, what they will create, that is exactly what many entrepreneurs, technologists, engineers are trying to sort of tinker around and figure out. So my view has always been that India should not go for a blanket ban. It is better to let these experiments play out, and let people see what they can do with this, rather than sort of ban a new thing like this and then drive that activity underground or even offshore.
But there has been some talk about launching a digital rupee as an answer to these cryptocurrency and blockchain-based currencies. So what is that digital rupee?
Yeah, so a central bank digital currency, what's called a CBDC. So many countries are contemplating launching that. Japan is doing so, China is doing so, the US is sort of also talking about it. The European Union through the Euro is also obviously talking about it, and so is India. But a fundamental difference between, like I said, there are two types of blockchains. You can have permissioned blockchains and permissioned and private, which is what a CBDC would be, or you can have permissionless and public, which is what Bitcoin and Ethereum are. So for certain types of applications, a CBDC may work well. For other applications, you may need to be on the global permissionless and public blockchain, which is Ethereum or Bitcoin. So cutting off Ethereum and Bitcoin from India would mean that, let's say the tinkerers and technologists who want to work on that can't work on that, or will face difficulties in working on that. So my view has been that let them coexist, and let the Indian sort of technologists also have the ability to build on that chain, to develop on that chain, and the government need not show any favor or embrace any particular one, right? Let the RBI launch a CBDC, let India have its own central bank digital currency, and let the others also have a space to grow and experiment.
But what about regulation? Because these kind of cryptocurrency can also facilitate corruption. They can also facilitate
For sure.
terror
Regulation is
funding and
necessary.
so on.
That is exactly the conversation India needs to have, actually. And my view is that these kind of digital assets, crypto assets, should be regulated and taxed. They should be treated like capital assets.
Huh.
So let there be licensed exchanges. Let there be regulation of such digital assets. So those who trade in it, those who make a capital gain on it, let them pay the tax on it.
So as of now, if someone is buying and selling the cryptocurrency, how is that treated?
I think it's a gray area. It's a gray area whether to disclose it on the income tax in India or not. Even other countries, it's one of those things where, again, like I was mentioning, regulation follows technology, right? So the technology runs ahead, and this has historically been true world over across cycles. Actually, many of the what came to be known as the labor law, sort of the labor laws that came out in the 20th century were a result of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
Right? Because until the Industrial Revolution actually happened, there were no firms of that scale. Like a company employing thousands of people, having that kind of a scale of operation simply didn't exist in the pre-Industrial Revolution era. And then there were companies that started doing that. And then some companies, were not treating the employees well, which is why we came to have labor laws. We came to have occupational safety and, those kind of regulations that if you're working in a mine, you need to follow this. If you're working here, you need to follow that. And it kind of evolved out of what had already happened. So in a similar way, technology always runs ahead. And then, it is regulators and policymakers who have to sort of figure out how to serve the public good here. And then they sort of evolve the policies, evolve the rules and regulations. And then obviously there's a compliance, and then there is a stability in the system. In fact, my view is regulation will actually help the sector because right now it is operating in the fringes, right?
Yeah. So if you're making crores of rupees, then you're keeping it all with yourself, it seems.
Some people could be doing that, yeah. I mean, if you have made capital gains and it's not disclosed, then, I mean, in a way, it's operating in its own this thing, right? So I think it is only sensible for governments to sort of regulate and tax, and it'll actually help the sector grow because then you will see more. Let's say some individuals and institutions may choose to stay away right now because of the regulatory gray area. They may not choose to participate. If you bring it under a proper framework, more people will participate. The market will grow. It will expand, and there'll be a wider participation of all kinds of investors.
Yeah. So coming back to fintech again, there has been a mad rush of investment in these fintech companies in India. And many people are saying this is just overvaluation. In fact, Zerodha, if I'm not wrong, has said that we don't want this money, which is pouring into India, into the fintech. What's your take? Are they overvalued?
No, so see, it's always valuation now. Obviously, it always depends on, it's in the eye of the beholder, right? So it depends on the time horizon. It depends on your view of the business. If you think a business has certain staying power, pricing power, and it has a long horizon for growth, then maybe you're willing to pay for some of that growth upfront. And if you look at some of the fintech companies, that is what they are pricing in. So they have shareholders or investors who are willing to stay invested for 3, 5, 7 years, who are willing to, bet on the team that is executing in that particular niche that the startup may be operating in. And their view is, India is a growing economy. There are very large unmet needs in Indian finance. Consumers have needs, businesses have needs. MSMEs have huge needs in credit, for example. The retail investor base is just about, people like you and me can think about it on a frequent basis. But for the vast section of Indians, the stock market is still something which is just a theoretical construct. It's other people do it, we don't do it. It's like that. There are hundreds of millions of people like that. So it depends on your view of the future, right? So if you think that all these people will one day be investors in the equity markets, you will invest based on that. I mean, there might be other people who think that that will never happen, and that's why they think that wait, this is overvalued. But I'm of the view, I'm of the view that in India will see more market participation from retail investors. We are only scratching the surface. We are a country of 1.35 or so billion people, and probably not even 10% or less than 10% of that, probably 5% of that is actively investing.
Yeah. So basically,
so that 5% will become 50% over some period of time.
Oh,
maybe
that's a very large number. I'm not that optimistic, but you are, it seems.
No, so why won't they, right, Abhinav? Tell me, where will the savings go? Where should people put their savings?
Yeah, but that will depend on the income. Are the incomes rising? Suppose if you're earning 1 lakh rupees a month in this country, you are among the top bracket. I think top 1 or 2% of this population. So
you're right, absolutely.
Where is the income to have those savings?
So the savings, so obviously, you're right. Part of my view is that incomes will increase in India, as they have. In the last decade, they've gone up. I think they'll continue to go up. I think the difference of view only comes in the rate of the increase. Some people think it'll happen faster. Others think it'll take more time. But there's no doubt that, over a decadal period, the Indian economy is expanding. The incomes will increase. People will have savings. And people need avenues to park those savings. Otherwise, how else do you convert? How do you get a return for your money?
So basically, you're saying a rising tide lifts all boats, and this is
so the macro. That's the macro context. So the macro context is favorable. It's very favorable.
Okay.
And within that macro context, you have certain niches that come up, right? So, I mean, Nitin Kamath obviously famously said he's not taking any money, and frankly, Zerodha doesn't need to take money because it's extremely profitable. I mean, he's built an amazing business. So whatever growth needs they have, they can meet through internal accruals, through their own earnings and cash flows. That may not, so it works for that particular category. But for some other category, that may not be true. Maybe you need to make a upfront investment. For example, if you want to start an AMC in India, you need to have a net worth of, I think, 50 crores or 100 crores. Right? So that is a licensing requirement. So now if you're looking to build an AMC, an asset management company in India, I think the rule is that you can do it with 100 crore rupees if you don't have a track record, and 50 crores if you have a track record.
Okay.
So then that basically means if I need 100 crores to start off, that I have to raise that capital, right? I mean, any entrepreneur will do that. And again, asset management as a business, what are the modes that are going to be there in India, and so on, are debatable. Like, you may say that there won't be legacy asset managers of the size that we have right now, in the way that they've grown. That they've grown through a kind of offline push, distributional push. But there will be a digital first AMC. But there will be somebody who will be in the intermediation space, right? Because people will want mutual funds, people will want index funds, exchange traded funds. Somebody's going to make it, package it, sell it. So the breakthrough moment, Abhinav, is the way I think of it is, I'm waiting for the day when I see like a person who's working as a driver or working as a watchman, when they sort of start with even 200, 500, 1,000 rupees investment. That's when you will know that the tide is really turned and financialization is deepening and faster in India. Because for that, in that category of workers, there is, just think about what they do with their savings, right? If they have savings. So if they have any savings, they probably just leave it in the bank. They may not be doing much with it. And financial literacy, investor education is a big part of the problem.
But let's say, there's been rising use of artificial intelligence in trading, in asset management, and so on. I think you already have bots doing tradings on the stock market, if I'm not wrong. So how do you think that is going to play out in the future? And what is the extent of use of AI as of now in financial trading?
No, so I don't see anything wrong with it. That's fine. So traders can use all kinds of strategies. Some of that includes automated sort of trading through certain very quantitative approaches. That is perfectly all right. In fact, in many ways, high frequency traders like that actually create liquidity in the market. So they have their participation in some ways enables the participation of many others.
Interesting. So my last question to you is that what's happening in the stock market? There's a bloodbath going on. How long do you think this is going to continue? Now you are smiling because you're also an investor. So I think I asked the right question now. What's happening in the stock market?
No, so see, this is obviously driven a lot by the pandemic situation, right? Completely driven by that. So back in January, February, there was a sense that maybe this is behind us. There was a sense that India has sort of overcome this. And even a month ago, actually, there was no second wave on the horizon as such. So if you look back to mid-March or so, things were looking like under control. But in the last 3 weeks or so, things have really escalated actually, especially in the last 15 days maybe. So that aspect of volatility comes in with that uncertainty that, if the cases keep escalating in India, and that raises the possibility of decline of economic activity, which will hit the earnings of the businesses, which is why there is a panic. So that is, to that extent, the market is only reacting to that, and frankly, as of now, nobody knows how this will evolve, which is enough, right, for people to run for safety.
Yeah. So let's hope that situation will improve soon. But thank you, Rajiv, for talking to us and discussing the future of India's financial sector. This is an evolving discussion. This is an evolving sector. So we will have you again whenever you will give us your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhinav. Yeah, so there's so much happening in financial services. I think there are so many needs that Indian consumers, businesses have. And in the next 8-10 years, there's going to be lots of new businesses completely built from scratch that will service those requirements and needs. So we are seeing some regulatory reform on that front to enable that. We are seeing investor interest in enabling that, and obviously even entrepreneurs are stepping up. So I think this is a great time actually to be in the financial services space. And when we talk of a 5 trillion GDP economy or a 10 trillion GDP economy, the financial sector will actually have to support that growth. It has a very important functioning in supporting and driving that growth. So you will see a burgeoning of the financial sector, and it's a very exciting time to sort of be a part of
that. Let's see how it plays out. I'm also cautiously optimistic. I'm not very optimistic about the Indian economy as of now. But thank you, Rajiv, and thank you, audience, for listening to us. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. You can also join as a member, and see you soon next time with another interesting discussion. And perhaps we can have Rajiv back to discuss something new on the topic of financial markets and the banking and other investment in India. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Abhinav. See you soon.